All right, hello. So, once again, I'm doing an impromptu reading on a day that isn't a reading day. Thursdays we read on the stream, but as anyone that has been following my Twitch or TikTok or really anything knows, uh, 3 weeks ago I published my first memoir about the first 30 years of my life as a late in life realized autistic person and a critical media ecologist that documented the latent life realized neuroqueer self realizations happening all over algorithmic platforms. And today, 3 weeks later from when I published that first one, I just published the second volume that's specifically about just Joe Biden, just about the last 4 years. So technically, yes. Um, this one is called On Being the Bad Guy, Neuroqueer Self-Realizations in the Algorithmic Environment. I created a series because technically I could have. So here's what happened, basically. I had been planning to write a book based off of my dissertation ever since I finished it. And then I realized that until I actually rehashed and wrote out secrets from the first 30 years of my life, that the book that I actually planned to write wouldn't have made any sense to anyone unless I did that. So I did that first. And then it was already, past 200 pages long once you shrink it down to 6 by 9. And I was like, okay, well, I didn't say any of the things I said I was going to say. So let me go ahead and say those things now in volume two, which is this one. So, like I said, it's published. Officially, the Kindle and the hardcover are published right now. The paperback is on its way. There's like it's shorter because obviously over the course of the last 4 years I didn't have 200 some pages to write. Although I guess if I really wanted to I could, but I didn't. It's about half as long, which is still pretty substantial for only 4 years. If 260 some pages was 30, I think it's really saying something. So anyway, this one, like I said, one more time, is called On Being the Bad Guy, Neuroqueer Self-Realizations in the Algorithmic Environment. And as I always do whenever I read anything, I'm going to start by reading the little write-up, and then today I'm just going to read the intro in chapter one, just like how I did for the first volume. So, anyone that's on Twitch, as always, you got a little view of it here. I zoomed in, so hopefully it'll be more visible than I usually zoom in. And as always, if you would like or could benefit from captions, that's over on my Twitch as well, but no pressure. All right, let's get into it. So it's short and simple. This is the write up for it. Have you ever been around people yet still felt alone? Dr. Bird has too. Within the first variant of their environmental series, they revealed 30 years of their late in life realized secrets. In this second volume, they literally and figuratively zoom in on the last four unprecedented ones. This includes them cutting the shit about how halfway through their PhD, COVID 19 hit, and how a couple years later they added doctor to the front of their nickname. In typical bad guy fashion, Plague Dr. Bird has more puns, cuss words, and trauma than all the answers on how to create our liberatory regenerative future, but for now they further diagnose how foundational US issues severely sicken, disable, and kill us in the algorithmic environment, and remind readers to drink water, do something nice for ourselves, and that we abso-fucking-lutely deserve better than this shit. So let's. I know I added that because I was like, well, it's number two. I gotta be honest. Book three. I was thinking about that actually last night, so it's funny that you asked that. I'm okay. I guess depending on how much future happens in the next 5 years, we'll keep. I'll keep you posted. This is everything super relevant. There's always more or less I could have added or not added, but yeah, I think it'll probably be quite a while. I feel like I've definitely reached a point of good closure having written these two. And what I was gonna say before is like easily could have, if I would have just waited and not like jumped the gun on the first one, I could have just technically made it like a single book that would have been like 400 pages long. But who wants to read a book that's 300 or 400 pages long? It's just too much book. Um, So anyway, this one's 4 chapters. There's not parts to it or anything. I have acknowledgments at the beginning again, and it goes like this. To everyone continuing to wear a mask in order to protect themselves and others from C19, and to all the autists who have isolated and masked in order to survive and live as who they are today. Give yourself more credit. Maybe you're a better writer than you think. So this is the introduction. It goes like this. Nothing made life clearer to me than COVID-19. I realized that I wasn't who I thought I was, and I had no idea who I was. So it was easy for me to be over drinking and working. It's been 4 years, and I have hardly seen anyone in person, because most people have decided that all our lives don't matter. They have been led to ignore an ongoing cardiovascular disease that the more you get, the more likely it is to disable and kill you. I really don't know what else to say about that. Except, I guess, also, this whole fucking book. However ill-informed their ongoing denialism is to them and us, this second volume of my memoir, just like the last, isn't to talk about them. It's to talk about me. And to reveal how I learned, unfortunately, the sheer amount of people who for most of our lives didn't know that they were autistic changes absolutely fucking everything. Meanwhile, I know that there's also a fuck ton more people, sometimes overlapping into a Venn diagram, who have remained COVID conscious for the last 4 years and counting. Many of these folks are suffering from extreme isolation, loneliness, and life reprocessing in an age where most everyone we've ever known now doesn't give a single fuck if we live or die. What is one supposed to do if they've just found out who they are during seemingly the end of the world? Just like before, everything I say in here is not, or herein, is so official. Whenever I write that, I'm like, yes. Herein is not hyperbole. People treating colonial capitalist reality as hyperbole is why some of the country is now on fire and the other part is floods. We have plenty of research that shows colonial capitalism has quite literally been hurtling us towards the climate apocalypse. This is why I ended the first volume of this stating that all very directly. We literally don't have enough time to pretend as if that's not the fucking case. And I think it's time we respect autist directness as a very useful message for people to get with the fucking program so that more of us don't die. In the United States, autists, formally diagnosed or not, have long been treated as if we are too much of everything, no matter how we act, no matter if we mask or not. Contextually, in this late-stage neoliberal capitalist environment era, humans continue to act as media in society-building processes, meaning in new algorithmic forms, they've successfully taken all things natural and commodified them, including intimate relationships. Nothing that exists is secret anymore, for better and for worse, so what are we going to do about it? Just like the first volume, I have more puns, cuss words, and trauma than answers, but reading my backstory in volume 1 will in fact be important for anyone who wants to understand the fullest perspective of my Dr. Bird's Eye view. So it will be best understood, that's a typo, if you read not just this volume, but also the first. In short, pretend I said that like it closed a sentence. In short, I live a life of a late-in-life realized autistic person who struggled with statistically backed amounts of substance abuse in the sexually violent U.S. ecology. This book is about my environment life. Yeah, there's definitely multiple reasons. I talk about a good amount of them. To make something crystal clear that I didn't mention in the first volume, recent research has shown that the vast majority of autists who do choose to self-diagnose are accurate in doing so. So what does this mean in the environment era? Well, with what we know about how many autists are high likelihood for a very long list of comorbidities, we're at high risk for COVID-19. As stated at the end of the first volume, we also know upwards of 80% of us who were assigned female at birth, AFAB, are not formally diagnosed by the age of 18 if we ever get diagnosed. There are countless lost generations of autists who may or may not ever learn that they are actually autistic. And perhaps most tragically, with eugenics and fascism returning, it's not safe to be openly autistic for any of us. But we are autistic all the same. Not having a formal diagnosis did not change the fact we experience and experienced lives that are, more or less, uniquely experienced, yet often similar to what a formally diagnosed autist does. That's what my first memoir details extensively. And to be honest, it's ridiculous that I even need to say that. But too many people treat categories as if they are the marker of what reality is, when anyone knows language, of course, or anyone who knows language, of course, knows that is not true. However, unfortunately, most of us are taught not to think about that. Like, we're not taught to think about almost everything that has happened and continues to go on to this day. That's what makes this environment era unique. Not only are we just now realizing what self realizations en masse of autists mean about our brains and what is normal, but we are also realizing in the same time period how common queernesses are, how fabricated the idea of straightness has always been. It's a rather new invention passed off as having existed forever as our default. We must always remain vigilant to language usage when talking norms. There's no such thing as straight without one culture's binary language used to describe biological sex or gender. Hence why within the first volume, I began by referring to Dr. Nick Walker's term neuroqueer in efforts to detail ways that neurotype and queernesses intersect. Readers may also see works like Spectrum's Autistic Trans People in Their Own Words, edited by Maxfield Sparrow only a few years earlier, and or Dr. Devin Price's Unmasking Autism. Anywho, point of me saying that is straightness is just one option. To say otherwise is to ignore everything that's ever happened. And it's the same with gender. And it's the same with neurotype, etc. That's why neuroqueer self-realizations in the algorithmic environment changes, quite literally, everything. They challenge dominant concepts of normal self-identity, relationships, and institutional legitimacy, opening doors to liberatory worlds. When done appropriately, the three critical media ecological tenets I discussed in Volume 1, we only know what we know, everything becomes normal in repetition, and everything is connected, reveal often totally new worlds within all our unique capacities to build. But first, we have to look back at what has been. We have to look back at the breakdowns that have led to breakthroughs. And boy, do we autists have a lot of fucking breakdowns. So there are also many breakthroughs to be had. Mass neuroqueer self-realizations are just a couple of breakthroughs paired together. And as countless artists, activists, and critical cultural scholars have said for a very, very long time, these characteristics, neurotype and queernesses, compound with every other demographic. I don't know about y'all, but I don't want to live in a world where I have no hope for the future. I don't want to live in a society where people pretend as if a thing that's killing us isn't killing us so that they can eat inside at Chili's. Every single time I watch anything on a streaming service anymore, I'm reminded of how much people don't give a single fuck about anything besides money. Whenever I go on to algorithmic platforms, all I see is people not being able to afford to live. And I'm one of those people. Despite all of my student loan, debt, and education, right now I can't afford to fucking live. And we all deserve better. So without further fucking ado, this volume is about how we all deserve better than what I'm about to recount from my last 4 eye-opening, isolated, impoverished years. As to be expected, the second manuscript builds on my volume 1, in which I shared my early life, my first 30 years, to best contextualize how and why I've lived my last 4 since COVID-19 hit. Spoiler alert, my dear readers, it's been a deeply lonely, now almost 5 years. I have never spent so much time alone in my entire life. I'm somehow still alive. I'm not sure if I've caught COVID-19. And there's a good chance I may never know. Thus far, millions of people have died globally. On national and global scales, we are also years into what researchers have called a loneliness epidemic. We're also years into the sex apocalypse, where people are having less sex. Fascism is returning. Most folks are ignoring both COVID-19 and the visibly worsening climate crisis, near daily new natural disasters. Meanwhile, I'm mostly inside my apartment alone. When I go out, I see people acting like none of this is happening. I can't even fathom it. The last 4 years, I've been stuck between a deep loneliness and inability to afford to live. Nearly every day I wake up to still exist within a US society that wishes I, an autistic queer person, was dead. To many of them, I am a neurotyped mistake. To most everyone, autistic brains are a mistake. To many others, my body is also a mistake. But you know what? This bigoted fucking society hasn't killed me yet. So now I'm a living, speaking fucking problem it's absolutely going to have to fucking deal with. In the first volume of my memoir, I talked about my life before March 2020. For sake of not repeating myself, this volume will discuss other details of my 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023 years. Occasionally, when relevant, I make mention of things I already went over within the first volume, where again I talked about the first 30 years of my life. So readers can understand where exactly I'm coming from, because obvi, I'm a culmination of everything I've learned by living. I only knew what I knew. Everything became normal in repetition, and everything was connected to what I'm now experiencing daily. That means going in chronological-ish order. Each of these chapters is going to be categorized as follows. So I wrote out all the numbers, but it literally just goes 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023. But I start with chapter 0 because 2020. Okay, so it's like chapter 0, 1, 2, and 3. Anyway, this volume is much more concise than the first one because I'm only painting a brief picture of who and how I was suffering the first 30 years of my life, became who I now am, yeah, guys, that's supposed to be now, and exist as during the last four. In doing so, I comprehensively discussed the stark differences between how I lived then, before March 2020, and how I lived the last 4 years. I did my best to viscerally unpack for everyone exactly what it has meant for me to have had my own personal self-realization in this environment. Truth be told, this is what I expected my first book to be. Then I realized while writing it that I actually needed to dig into my early life before I could write this part. I needed to do that both for myself, but I also needed to do it so that I could write this second volume. Or else it wouldn't have made anywhere near as much fucking sense to most people who are about to read this one. Therefore, my goal by the end of this volume is for it to make better fucking sense as to why I feel so strongly about still being cared to be COVID conscious in a world of folks who don't. Maybe some of them do, but they don't act like take preventative measures anymore like they care. Also, why I now can't imagine that. This is my explanation as to why I can't imagine not caring after my miserable lifetime of mostly not giving a fuck if I lived or died as an unrecognized autist. It's easy to not care if you live or die if when you're not living as who you fucking are. This is the story of who I fucking am and how I don't want to die now that I am. So, now what? That's the end of the introduction. So, like I said, that starts with chapter 1, which is called so it's in brackets. It would almost be easier if I just showed you, but honestly, you're just gonna have to see it if you just buy it and then look at it. So I got 2 in brackets, and then 0, and then 2, 0 in brackets. So like I said, it's 2020, but it's chapter 0. Goes like this. Welcome back to March 2020. It's absolutely terrible here. For anyone that would like a more in-depth description of my 2020, I invite you to check out chapter 4 of the first volume of my memoir that gives you all the bits and pieces that most people on the outside could already see. But if you have read it, or are just looking for more of that internal ushy-gushy, mushy-mushy stuff, you've come to the right second volume place. Recently, I attended a Story Center workshop. As told in chapter 2 of my first book, I survived being falsely imprisoned at 23 years old. So for this workshop, I chose to make a digital story about that horrific experience. Not for trauma porn, but to highlight to the public in my locale the statistics about how upwards of 80% of AFAB autists aren't diagnosed by 18, and how 9 out of 10 of us live #MeToo lives anyway. In my story, I included a clip of paint swirls. It was an abstract motion picture that looked like and symbolized the feeling of how once, when I was on a field trip to the Indiana Dunes as a kid, while trying to ride waves, my face hit the bottom of Lake Michigan and my nose bled profusely. At 23, false imprisonment also blended my blues and greens, mixing them with the stark redness of my own blood. It was how weightless danger felt. Sorry in advance, dear reader, but keep this all in mind as you imagine that it's March 2020 again. Imagine swirling breakdowns. Imagine you had been working on your PhD for 2 years full-time before it happened. After a few months, imagine that the one faculty member who advocated for you above anyone else stepped down from your committee because you relied on them too much, which was true, and no hard feelings. And then a week later, your mom called to say she's about to die and was being put on home hospice and loads of morphine. My memory of 2020 feels like eerie blue-green, wait, oh yeah, blue-green blurs, swirled with my warm blood from a hard impact, too. That first year of COVID-19, I was completely alone in an old moldy ass apartment. The longer I stayed there, the more it literally, not figuratively, made my nose bleed. Then one day my landlord tore apart my front deck that had a cool bench, replacing it with a bad construction and paint job shitty one, without any notification. Imagine being 4 hours away from anyone you ever knew who'd harmed and or supported you, grieving the loss of the person who brought you into this joyful and awful world, and not being allowed to see anyone besides behind a screen. Then imagine that your dad contracted COVID-19 only 2 days after your mom had just passed from lung cancer, and not being able to have or attend her wake until a month later while you wait to see if your dad might shortly die too. Imagine during all of this, you are also deep in the major crunch time of completing your PhD program courses after a full 2.5 years, where after each and every semester, you had to reteach yourself how to breathe because you're an unrecognized autistic person and didn't know. Imagine not being allowed to take a break by university administration later that same month. Can you imagine it? Imagine disassociation. Breakdowns from a Dr. Bird's Eye View. Before COVID-19 arrived, I had always thought I hated video calling. It felt so very impersonal. There weren't any eyes for me to connect with. In that way, I'd learned my whole life to survive. Anyway, I thought that literal prolonged eye contact was what I was supposed to be doing. Turns out, as an autist, that I took eye contact far too literally. So typical of me as an autist. Sorry, my email is like trying to reconnect. I've had like all these like weird issues with my email, so it's gonna bother me on my iPad if I don't connect it. So let me pause. And now it's gonna make me, what's up, Andy? I'm reading the new volume of my memoir that just came out like literally earlier today. Like not even 2 hours ago. I gotta do the thing where I log into YouTube and then I get a little code. It's so annoying. Like Google is fucking obnoxious. I don't know if it's even gonna let me do it on here. You know what? Fuck it. All right, let's continue. Oh man, I'm sorry. Well, you've come to the right place. We're in 2020 though, so brace yourselves. In time, much like compulsory heterosexuality, I had learned to accept and embody the video call. All my literal eye contact in person left and was replaced with only Zoom. After my first online MEA conference, I remember I still felt the emptiness after logging off. It was new then. It reminded me of how years before this, I described to a few people about a distinct awareness that I've had ever since I first moved from my childhood home into a new apartment. The feeling I got after first moving in, knowing it didn't quite feel like home yet. Knowing that eventually that newness feeling would disappear. Zoom worked exactly the same way. In 2020, some people told me that I didn't grieve the right way. I never wanted to talk about it out loud using my actual voice. Just text. What was there for me to say? I was completing my PhD coursework as a part of the most connected humanity during a pandemic that ever existed. I remember attending Zoom panels where pre-COVID graduated alumni did their best to give advice for a job market that they had never experienced. The uncertainty of it all sickened, disabled, and profitably deadened our futures. It filled in infinite squares Zoom squeezed us into. People complained Zoom just wasn't the same. In the beginning, me included. But the longer space happened, I learned it's for better and worse. A week before my mom had passed away, she finally disclosed to our older sister and I that she had in fact sued many companies for her lung cancer. She'd traded silence for blood money. The many corporations that are responsible for poisoning my mom to death filled her margaritas to stay silent and fed inside of the same Mexican restaurant that my dead to me extended family members screamed racist shit at me at a few years before she died from it on home hospice. I lived 2020 almost entirely inside my own head. Sometimes with my body, I took a lot of drives. First to get out of the house once in a while, but also to pick up some nice vegan food about 30 or 40 minutes away, just so that I would have somewhere to go with at least a KN95 mask on. Many people were at least wearing a mask then. Even with all the horrors, it was a year most everyone at least still pretended that they gave a single fuck about anyone's life besides their own. After my mom passed, I had more money than I could possibly know what to do with, and had nowhere I could safely go or safely enjoy in public. That first year of living without third spaces, but with everything I could buy and more, was surreal. For a couple years, I had been living without almost every basic thing I needed to survive inside a large 2-bedroom, 2-living-room apartment that was now making my nose bleed. Some friends sent me, "Sorry, your mom died during a global pandemic," flowers. Others wanted me to talk to them, but all I needed to do was be alone in the company of just my own silence. They just didn't understand. That year, shortly after my mom had passed, I embraced the financial freedom to actually start paying for things that I had been living without. There is an entire mental process I was living. It was an unlearning process that I didn't deserve anything I needed to exist. It took a long time. It was an unmatchable, arduous, and unattainable privilege most people will never experience ever, let alone during such an incredibly traumatic time. I can certainly say that without that, I wouldn't have survived. Not a chance in fucking hell. It still didn't make it better. Because while money is freedom, it still didn't make up for the profitable poisonous death of your mother. Buy 2 breakdowns, get 2 breakthroughs free. I paid off all my credit cards. The credit card companies didn't understand that at first. First, they presumed that I'd maxed out all my cards. So they tanked my credit score. I then had to call them to tell them I paid them all off, and they fixed my credit score. That's how rare it is for a millennial to suddenly receive lots of money, to be released from their credit card debt. And yes, I didn't touch my student loans because fuck them. By the point I received this blood money, I had long lived the 90s episodic trope of spending far too much on credit cards, and was now transitioning into the Rugrats Chucky Finster is Rich episode, where his family won the lottery and they splurged. I had all kinds of fancy things delivered to me. None of them made me happy. I bought real hair cutting shears off of Amazon and learned how to cut my own bangs while I waited for all the bleached blondness to grow out from my roots into my natural brunette. It was very symbolic of the fact that not only was I bleaching my hair, but I had been bleaching basically my entire sense of self to present a version of me to the world in a more non-autistic way. I needed to grow and cut all that shit out. One of my favorite purchases ever was I bought a frame to hang my yoga swing on. During the summer before I started my PhD, I was gifted yoga silks by one of my yoga friends. But all that time, I could never hang them anywhere safely. So I just didn't do anything with them until I could afford to buy this frame to hang them in my apartment. At that point in my PhD, I was barely doing the amount of headstands that I used to, and my yoga practice had basically dissolved. But that yoga swing allowed me to do inversions without the grounding I used to have. I was a bird in flight, and I posted it all over the Instagrams. Other times, I would just sit inside of it. For anyone that doesn't know, this makes it basically just a sensory swing. When safe, I highly recommend feeling the weight of your body cradled like a little baby by some silks. I got a foot massager and one of those massagers you drape over a seat for your high-low back and shoulders. I got Roombas that sweep your floors and then mop up after, mostly the sweeping one I named Gerald. Just destroys everything in your home that gets in its way. That's so Gerald. At some point, I finally requested that my shitty landlord fix the stripped wood spots on my floor. And they did, so I breathed in poison for days from the varnish that their maintenance people covered all the patches of stripped wood planks in. And as someone who had only newly learned, they're now 4 times as likely to die from lung cancer. In the grieving meantime, I bought all the basic things average people wouldn't imagine living without. Blood money reminded me, oh yeah, I'm a person too. A reminder most poor people never access, like the final boss stage of Scientology, where you finally learn that Lord Xenu exists. Except in my case, Lord Xenu was the COVID era existential crisis that corporate silent blood money didn't replace the death of my mom. This is also why a couple years later, I finally wrote Mother is Calendar, available on my Substack. That first month of her passing, some kind folks delivered me care packages or homemade meals. A friend of mine from my master's sent me a very well manicured witchy gift box put together with care. My first tarot deck was inside. They say the first one always needs to be gifted. This one was in the style of gypsies. Very appropriate. Occasionally I would hang out on Zoom with some people from my PhD program, but as I described in the first volume, I never really got along with them. I realized I only drank when I was on Zoom with them. Otherwise, when I was entirely by myself, I never felt the need or desire to drink. That was a miraculous realization that took me a very long time, while grieving the loss of my mom and my entire outside life, to process. As I described in my first book, I have drank heavily in public almost my entire life. It was such an enormous part of my identity. I really thought it was who I was then. I thought that I was just an alcoholic. Even though for all that time, I basically never had a drink at home by myself because I never enjoyed the feeling of it. Yet somehow for 30 years, my never drinking at home never clicked for me until COVID-19 hit. After a while, with organizations explaining that we need to wear masks, I realized that it wasn't safe for me to continue going to a laundromat or anywhere during this scary global pandemic. I remember realizing at one point in my early years of COVID, as I was preparing for my dissertation on sociosexual ecologies, that some people were going to fetishize wearing masks and not social distancing. And then it would definitely become a porn category soon. People fetishize basically anything you can possibly imagine. And not to yuck anyone's yum, but I knew that this was going to be especially disappointing to see, because it was going to sexualize the act of endangering all of our lives and for profit. Not too long after that, the CDC recommended that people go to glory holes as a safer alternative to being sexual but behind a wall to prevent COVID. Obviously, that won in my dissertation. I started getting all my groceries delivered. The grocery store always overstimulated me anyway, so this was a welcome, although overpriced, accommodation. I bought a couple of those small washers and dryers for my apartment, but then I realized eventually, after months and months of nosebleeds from being inside that huge, moldy-ass apartment, apparently far too much more than before, I needed to get the fuck out of there. Can't speak into the air? Down the rabbit hole. That and my mom's lung cancer plunged me down a rabbit hole of learning about indoor air quality. Spoiler alert, on average, it's absolutely terrible thanks to colonial capitalism. I did a lot of research about air quality. I learned a lot about it, lead pipes, and how absolutely terrible they all are. How much they're all killing us because colonial capitalism poisons our loved ones to death for profit inside and outside of our homes. And it does it silently without us even knowing it. Because it's not responsible for the collective repercussions of material preservatives and other chemicals all over basically every product that's ever been manufactured. But those chemicals still collect in our air, all around us, inside our homes, killing us slowly. And yes, just like that one song, because colonial capitalism is romanticized and fucking abusive. Just like any predator, it will gaslight you out of believing what you know. Oh, hell yeah. Thanks for being here, Violet Stacy. And obviously everyone. And thank you for saying, I know I saw Miranda, thanks for being here too. And obviously, like I said, everyone. Most every US institution will treat you like what you see with your own eyes is invalid if their organization is behind you and seeing what you've connected. Especially if your pattern recognition is great. This world doesn't like you if your pattern recognition is great. It hates you. And you still have to keep living in it anyway. The key embarrassment difference between this first year of COVID and my early life was isolation. But not only was I more physically isolated than I ever had been before, but I was more connected via platforms than I ever was before too. And as anyone who studies ways that systems implement bread and circuses, giving the people what they need and then dividing them so they can't talk, knows that's a difference that made a difference. The longer I was physically alone with only algorithmic connections, all I had was time to grieve and think about my life. I had no idea how long this pandemic would go on at that point, but that first year got my mental ball fucking rolling. That same year, I met someone on Twitter who was a much more open about it autistic person. I messaged them to talk about my own realization. They were hella helpful to me. It was like I got an autism welcome basket. They told me about a poetry night that they were reading in soon. It was stationed out in New York, but on Zoom. I attended and met a bunch of cool and legit poets. They had a poetry night every Monday night on Zoom then. So I started attending it regularly and would sometimes talk with them afterwards. Later on, I read some poems myself, and then eventually I was grateful to publish in their KGB bar magazine some COVID infatuation poems. The remainder of this chapter is what I had only just begun to realize to myself during late 2020. COVID-19, awesome, awesome. It's autism, but also awesome. COVID-19 autism masking breakthroughs. Late 2020 made me exceptionally aware that we and all our bodies are surfaces for COVID-19 in the environment era. I became painfully aware of every single thing's place in space I touched with my hands, especially before I was about to eat. To resolve this experiential existence crisis, after I would wash my hands, I designated my left hand as the one I touched food with during eating, whereas my right hand is the one that I can touch all else. So far, this has worked for me. Before you judge me, my first-hand literal tediousness follows hand-washing habits that health organizations suggest we follow so we don't transmit COVID-19. I also never went so far as to wash my groceries, so let me do this. And as far as I know, it's helped me make sure I don't get COVID. Alongside other regular hand-washing habits, like after I touch anything I think might have gotten COVID on it. For better and for worse, the skin on my hands dealt with it. But this wasn't the first time I was being hyper-attuned to my body and space. I'm an old pro at it. Many non-autistic folks can't begin to understand the level of self-policing that I was undergoing for the first 30 years of my life, even when I was living entirely alone. That was the default way for me to exist, under constant vigilance and duress. And I don't mean this like somebody who just lives with PTSD hypervigilance. Even though, of course, yes, this certainly also interplays with my personal experience as an autist that has had to pretend to be someone they're not my whole life. What I mean is that I was basically existing as a manic pixie dream girl 24/7, even when I was entirely alone, convincing myself that's who I was. Because I didn't know who I actually was, and I had to keep up that charade for everyone around me my entire life. And until I got to see content from people who were describing their life that so eerily and distinctly described my own in ways that I had been long hiding, I finally began to peel back the countless scabbed over layers of autist masking that I had to put up. I don't think that non-autistic people can really understand the level of micromanagement anyone who is and can undergoes. And it's much more complex when you're also queer and a millennial raised into an age where you're not allowed to be any of those things. You are actually shamed for them. Or no, actively, but also actually. It goes without saying that obviously any level of racialization increases that duress. And of course, I can't speak to that firsthand, but there's plenty of great content creators out there that talk about that at length nowadays. Which is to say that I, quite literally, wasn't allowing myself mentally or physically to move. After a lifetime of having to freeze all movement, it was like being within a constant prison of my own wardening. And I never allowed myself to acknowledge the fact that I had internalized mental and physical restraints from being in a world that stopped me moving in ways I naturally need to move to regulate my nervous system. So needless to say, I was on fucking edge, always. Because I had been internalizing the self-hatred of all my natural inclinations. It went so far beyond the typical bullying that cringe culture inflicts upon everyone. It went so far beyond any kind of hiding in a closet. My own body had become a fucking prison cell from my full sense of self that I was never allowed to embrace. I was falsely imprisoned inside of my own body. So, as I described extensively in the first volume, I acted like I hated myself because I did hate myself. I hated myself in ways that I couldn't have possibly articulated then. I was internalizing the systemic hatred that the society demands of autistic people. Word on the street is that not all of us go on to embody this pervasive sense of self-hatred, but that it is unfortunately rare. Which again is why our substance abuse is so common, and average autist life expectancy used to be 36 and is now 39. I'm a community elder at 33 years old. This world would prefer me dead. If readers have in fact read the first volume of this memoir series, y'all will see that one thing is abundantly clear. It is a miracle that I am alive. Which is to say, if I wasn't given the space and yeah, the extreme isolation that COVID started, if I was not kicked entirely off my fucking bullshit into rock bottom during 2020, between the loss of my mother and the loss of basically everything, living off of corporate blood money, I can guarantee that I would be dead right now. Because I'd still be drinking at the levels that I was. I would still be blacking out regularly, not recognizing that I'm autistic, and therefore not able to meet or cope with any of my needs in healthy ways. I would be working myself to death and drinking to still throw up profusely. I would be forgetting keys in the front door, leaving myself an open target to who the fuck knows who in my nightly blacked out state. That first year opened the door to my realizing that I wasn't drinking because I just wanted to. I was drinking because in public I needed to socially survive. And turns out if I have literally any other coping mechanisms, I don't need that. And that was actively killing me, as any kind of substance abuse is known to do. As was the entire mental and physical duress of my overwork, my unprocessed lifetime of sexual violence, lack of all basic care, and having to pretend to be who I am not, which triggered my fight or flight almost constantly as a PDA profile autistic. Because basic demands trigger my fight or flight, putting me into a state of constant stress, beyond the likes of which a non-autistic and maybe even a non-PDA person couldn't possibly understand. Imagine if you experienced a panic attack every day, multiple times a day, for the first 30 years of your life. Can you imagine how you might feel by the age of 30? Spoiler alert, it's bad. It's an absolute misery that I wouldn't wish on anyone, besides, of course, pedophiles, rapists, and Nazis. Little bird, it's time to wake up and move. Hell yeah. I think it's a lot. I mean, this whole book is really, it's a lot. But in a way that I've never seen anyone tell before. So please, like I said, if you like it and you know any other people that can relate to it, please share it with them, because I'm writing this for our community that I know has experienced this and has also almost certainly never seen this all written down either. This is why, as soon as I started learning who I actually am, and why I had such an enormous difficulty with just surviving for the first 3 decades of my whole fucking life, as soon as I learned that I had any inkling of ability to care for myself, I was able to thrive amidst unprecedented global crises and uncertainties. A chaos state had been my bread and butter my entire fucking life. Which is to say that there is a distinct difference between someone like me and the non-autistic person who has never spent time in solitude and openly says they can't possibly stand to be alone. Not to say that I don't ever experience loneliness, because of course I do. I'm still a human being. But it is to say that the thing that has distinctly differentiated between my experience as a late in life realized autistic person and a non-autistic person who entered this pandemic is that quite literally everything for the first 30 years of my life was horrific and miserable, because I lived in a society that absolutely hates my fucking guts and has done everything it can to normalize the dehumanization of autists like me for living as ourselves. In other words, we're the bad guys. And these and more systemic discriminations against autists are very newly well documented. Might I remind readers of all the statistics that I listed at the end of my first memoir in the start of chapter 5. Those are just merely the beginning. Again, we know that self-diagnosis is incredibly accurate. People need to recognize experiential criteria must amend the traditional observational diagnostic criteria that failed us. Pay attention to all the research from the last 10 to 15 years about autism. All of that research is what I learned and started to really dig into around 2020 and 2021. I'm still by no means an expert on every way an autistic person can experience life, because we're not a hive mind. I can only speak to my own experience and the knowledge that I've gained about recent research on autists, and specifically the countless lost generations of autists because of how badly the formal criteria failed most of us. Which is to say, the likelihood of me having actually obtained a PhD, done the research that I did, after having survived the life that I had, that really, in every instance, should have disqualified me from ever getting a PhD in the first place, has miraculously collided into my ability to see all these things together in tandem, and how we only know what we know, everything becomes normal in repetition, and that everything is connected. So, as horrible as my life has been, my specific life is the perfect breeding ground in many ways for people to understand the full torment of what it means to not know who you are as an autist until the age of 30. Even on TikTok, I've never seen anyone describe all experiences that I've lived. Despite the fact I know that I fall into most of the terrifying statistics regarding our substance abuse and sexual violence that we experience at high rates compared to non autistic people, I know only because of recent research. This new research changes everything. Again, I mentioned it in short in chapter 5 of the last book for a reason. In this one, throughout the following chapters, I expand more in depth on the final two shortest chapters of the total first book 5. Books 5. I phrased that so weird. There's 5 chapters in the first. I expand on the last 2. This volume is shorter than the first because I focus in depth on the self-realizations that I've made while being almost entirely alone for the last 4 years. Which is to say, let me remind, as I did within my dissertation project, that besides access to social media platforms, the level of isolation I have endured is equivalent to the most inhumane form of psychological and physical torture one can sustain. Most of my last 4 years could be considered little more than solitary confinement. For the vast majority of the last 4 years, I have been almost entirely alone in one apartment or another, connected safely only behind one screen or another through social media platforms. And if I wasn't, I was around people who acted as if an ongoing cardiovascular disease doesn't exist. They acted as if me taking precautions to prevent from contracting C19 as someone known high risk for long COVID and also a severe case of COVID. This is normal systemic discrimination. Within prison, the level of isolation that I have lived throughout the last 4 years is considered a form of corporal punishment that is deemed too inhumane to endure for more than a few months. And yet, in hindsight, this is still the most relaxed my nervous system has been in my entire life. That's really fucking saying something. Disclosing an experience of extreme isolation during this era is a narrative that I haven't seen anyone else articulate in fullness that I do herein. Because most people don't pay attention to the most recent research, and thus are misled by the CDC into deep denial to act like COVID-19 doesn't even exist anymore. This also includes most authors that I've seen writing about this era. Most disappointingly, those who write about sex. But anyone who writes about COVID in the past tense right now is propagating eugenics rhetorics. This mass normalized denial has exceptional consequences on people who don't have the privilege to be able to pretend it doesn't exist. Meaning anyone who is immunosuppressed, immunocompromised, are already disabled in whatever other capacity, and or they're non-disabled but also just recognize that literally anyone who contracts this cardiovascular disease enough times is not going to survive without a lifelong disability and untimely death. Meaning realizing who I am and embracing me alone for the first time in my life while being able to afford to live on blood money, therefore not having to work myself to death, and not being in constant fight or flight despite isolation, has truly changed my life in profound ways. Mind you, most of us couldn't afford to have the same, yet mass self-realization still occurred. For me, those circumstances were why I was able to write my dissertation in 5 months. It's comparably easy for me to endure bad things simultaneously since I had my entire fucking life. I have a kind of autism that allows me to benefit from hyperfocus. That is quintessentially autistic. I experience monotropism for better and worse. It's also why I was able to write the entire first volume of my memoir that's 200 some pages within a week's time. Because it was the easiest thing I'd ever written. I'm used to writing incredibly comprehensive and dense academic articles in a dissertation, all of which usually require me to seek out dozens, if not hundreds, of citations and references of other people's works. All the first volume of my memoir required of me mentally was to recount my lifetime that I mostly, for obvious reasons, didn't think about. Before that, I just didn't remotely understand my own life because I didn't know who I was yet. For anyone who does and wants specific sources that extensively back up any all claims that I make in this book or anything I said in the first volume, I cited them elsewhere on academia.edu, where I put all my published articles and chapters for free, because I know that there shouldn't be any barriers between the public and knowledge. With some of my basic 2020 realizations now uncovered, let's unpack them. What does it mean if the system is so dead set on dehumanizing autists? What does it say about the system that it's decided all autists are a hive mind? What does it mean if the system refuses to acknowledge autist humanity? Even us newly realized autists. Before our realizations, we flew under the radar being seen as quirky or short-tempered, or whatever other microaggression. Now knowing that, without a doubt, there are probably millions, if not billions of us that have been missed because of the criteria failing most of us, we are a lot more normal than people used to believe. That means the concept of who is normal is wrong. That other time I had to live with this part's funny. That other time I had to live with and care for a being that could kill me. If all that wasn't enough, closing out 2020, I had Twinkle again. Remember, she'd been living with my parents for the prior 10 years. My cat child I pawned off onto my mother like a grandkid. It was time for me to resume cat motherly duties. But remember, I'm still allergic to cats. And I have a history of severe, potentially deadly allergies to goddess knows what. Question mark, question mark, question mark, question mark. Have you ever had to take care of anything that can kill you? That being that you impulsively adopted because it was so cute to teen you that you couldn't bear without it. Then at the age of 30, the deadly reality hits and your mom dies. Imagine not all of it could kill you, but you're allergic to its saliva. Imagine you haven't touched another being in months. And finally, there is a being that could kill you, and you can also touch it, all from the comfort of your own home. So statistically, imagine like your average cis man that you don't have sex with, but whose saliva can kill you. Do you want to give that thing pets? Imagine you're a human being that suffers if you don't touch anyone a while, and yet because of a deadly virus, you were barely allowed to hug your mom when she was on hospice for fear of giving her said virus that attacks the exact organ that her cancer metastasized from, and she, not long after, died. The being was her baby for the last 10 years. She'd been with the family her whole effing life. She slept in your bed as a kitten. She knows no one else. She's only about 11 years old, and the thing that can kill you can live a number of years beyond that. This is the only family you have living in the same state. You need the company, even if it can and could kill you. You're used to spending a lot of time with things that could kill you. This is nothing new to you. Occasionally, the thing that can and could kill you scratches you on accident, and you have to immediately go into allergy fighting mode. Your body reacts violently to the cute thing that can kill you's scratches. Your hands break out if you pet the being much. You have to wash your hands every single time after you ever pet them. But they have nowhere else to go. You really do love them. They were cared for very well by your now dead mother, and they're your little baby one. Now the thing that can kill you, you need to take to the vet to get their nails trimmed every few weeks. And as much as you like to pet it, when you do, there's a chance it will drool all over the place. You put up gates in front of your bedroom and bathroom so that they can't get inside. You automate basically everything they need to live. Food, water bowl, litter box. They're mostly chill. You decide that the thing that can kill you gets its own throne. It's basically a large thing that can kill you bed. You get the very cute thing that can kill you, very nice food for it. You get it very nice treats. You hang out like an old couple sitting in separate chairs watching whatever stuff on TV. You never really enjoyed the company of other human beings anyway. It was also always very uncomfortable for you. This being whose saliva can kill you does not talk. It is cute, and even though its saliva can kill you, it understands your boundaries and has good boundaries itself. You really respect this about the being that can kill you. You're not so different, you and them. People shit talk you both for just existing as you are all the time. Some people just aren't thing that can kill you people, and others just aren't Dr. Bird people. Honestly, it's fine. Shrug emoji. It was bad enough that the old house made my nose bleed. My nose and eyes really couldn't handle also having her. So after months of trying to avoid taking regular allergy pills every day, because most of them have dairy in them and I'm vegan, fuller story explained in volume 1, I found a non-dairy allergy pill that I could take. Then we moved into a bougie apartment. I think I'm gonna read one more chapter just because it's I just really like it. I really I'm really proud of how this has turned out. And I feel like if I stop at 2020, it's gonna be too depressing for all of us. It's not like the next chapter is less depressing, just so everyone knows. I don't know. How long have I been reading anyway? When did I start this? Like an hour ago? Something like that? It hasn't been 90 minutes because I haven't gotten a warning about it. The next chapter is bonkers. Like it's actually ridiculous. I'm okay. I'll read one more. Like I said, there's 4 chapters in total, so you'll get half of it. The next one, like I said, is called Chapter 202 in brackets and then 1. So it's chapter 1, but it's 2021. My nose finally stopped bleeding, and I was far less miserable after we moved into a luxury apartment complex. I attempted to seek out an organization to get the last place tested for mold, but I found out getting air mold testing is expensive and almost impossible. Anyway, that new place made me remember what it was like growing up in a suburb. Everything so incredibly well manicured. So many lights that allegedly kept the crime away. The pool was full of salt. I had never lived anywhere so unwelcoming. I mostly stayed in my own apartment unit. Around this time, I tried to get my asynchronous teaching exemption, so I wasn't putting my life at risk, and the admin denied it a week before the semester started after it was already put in place. So I stepped down from my teaching associateship because my mom didn't win blood money for her spawn to be killed during a global pandemic due to corporate education administrators' bullshit. A week later, I joined the All Audio App Clubhouse to be on a panel about doing so. Despite having 6 years teaching experience, I was still completely unconfident in using my voice then. And being on that app and having connections that helped me realize that I had stuff to say of value that could contribute to the overall well-being helped me become who I am to this day as a speaker. The connections I made there and the work I saw being done definitely changed my life for better and some for worse. That time I embraced more gypsy shit. Shortly thereafter, I started teaching myself how to read tarot. I ripped all the pages full of sexual violences I'd survived out of my Flower Press Pages journal and burned them in the moonlight. Almost every night, as I was drifting off to sleep, I was absolutely plagued with the starts of poems about unrequited infatuations. It was like I needed to puke those words out of my mind holes. Think the scene where Ron Weasley magically puked out tons of slugs, except in my case, it was my lives past compulsory yearning cis heterosexuality that I centered around cis men. To repeat again, I was almost entirely alone all of 2021. I did exactly the right amount of thinking, sobbing, somatic movement, and telling myself that I didn't deserve that shit, and also what I did deserve but never got. I wrote a lot of positive ass affirmations down and said them to myself day and night. I learned how to protect my energy and set boundaries when people didn't treat me how I deserved. This is the second volume of my book. It's about the last 4 years specifically. Right now I'm reading about 2021. But yes, so the first one came out 3 weeks ago. This is the second one that literally was published today. So welcome. Most of my socializing in the year 2021 was done entirely on Clubhouse. I met some people that were cool, others that were incredibly fucking toxic and thrived off of shit talking anyone they could ever possibly contact, no matter what medium they were talking through. As always, this audio medium was for better and for worse. I spent a lot of time practicing how to hone my personal message and translate the academies that I learned to speak to survive in academia back into something that was most intelligible, eye-opening, and useful to the general public. Oh, hell yeah, congrats. Clubhouse was an invaluable space for me to do that. But it also showed me that sometimes, as a PDA profile autist with hyperlexia and stilled speech, I just can't put too much energy into communicating a message to people who are unwilling to fucking hear me no matter what. As days progressed, they were also cool reading rooms that some people I met on there would run. I also would run some myself, although I've never been very good at self-promotion. And so I would start mine impulsively because my PDA profile autist brain otherwise treated running them as a demand that I would majorly dread. When I was on that app, I also finally started working through and practicing putting down personal boundaries in a way that I never had my whole life. One particular person who thought very highly of themselves and name dropped, outright bragged about knowing transphobic comment spewing Judy Singer in person before she was outed for doing so by other scholars like Dr. Nick Walker, tried to manipulate me, and I stood up for myself. I told her, "You don't get to talk to me like that," and I blocked her cruel ass. Point being, people like her and most anyone I'd ever met in the last few years had no fucking idea what I've lived, and so they often mischaracterized me. They only knew what they knew of me, who I had to become to survive, became normal in repetition, and everything was connected. Also, thank you for the follow, Chris. I'm reading, hello, I just saw that you said hi. I'm reading the second chapter of the second volume of my memoir. Well, you can see it right here. It's this. I began to see that I was often treated like the bad guy, yet I wasn't the fucking bad guy now. A few short months later, I pursued my greatest pastime, performing infatuation of a cis man who was emotionally unavailable. My new muse. This time, I'd only ever talked to them through voice. But my compulsory cis heterosexuality bird ass didn't care. I was totally loving the fact that they used a lot of puns and seemed to have a good head on their shoulders. Every once in a while, they were a little bit sexual with the way they'd say something, and I was like, I see you. Also, thank you for the heart meme. Besides some pretty okay poems, this experience showed me that my compulsory heterosexuality knows no bounds. The performative aspect of that experience had become so normal for me that even without seeing him, I performed my part. A miraculously strange environment self-discovery. The T. After months of talking to him regularly, I found out he's married and monogamous. Somehow it just never came up. Such a coincidence! Every once in a long while, I still talk to this voice-infatuated, punny married friend, but they've definitely distanced themselves for understandable and obvious reasons. And for a good reason, if you think about it. I mean, I had already been alone for 2 whole years at that point. People who haven't lived that long alone can't even imagine it. Again, on one hand, it's basically just solitary confinement, a form of actual torture. In recent books like The Lonely Hunter and The Lonely Century, as well as research by Tiffany Fields' work on the damage of touch hunger, it's well known that no touch has extreme detriments to our health. By then, I had touched almost no one for going on 2 years. So I'd only endured half of what I have now. But again, my nervous system had never been more relaxed. I was drinking less than I ever had before in my life. I was drinking less coffee and more water. I was exercising. I was still able to meet people and have actually really good thought-provoking conversations on apps. Environment disconnections, breakdowns. Moving to a different but not disconnected question. What does it mean of a society that refuses to take basic safety measures for a deadly virus that's now surging again as I write this, which, if not dealt with, could actually wipe out our species, even before the colonial founded capitalist-funded climate crisis that is flooding and setting fire to vast amounts of the world? What does it mean if said current society is so unwilling to recognize the damage of the current structure and orientation? They would rather the most of us stay dehumanized until the point that the planet literally kills us all off, instead of just recognizing we can't continue to live this way and that we all deserve better. Why are the last two things so off limits that people refuse to even accept the fact that they're happening now? The long COVID and COVID-19 denialism are as sickening, disabling, and deadly as denying the incrementally worsening climate crisis. They're both products of environmental racisms and injustices. Research shows that those hit... Sorry, I hit a thing and then I brought up a part that blocked me. Those hit hardest by COVID-19 in the US are those in red line populations. No. And we can almost certainly presume that indigenous folks whose lands were stolen and ruined by colonizers and then the US government segregated into reservations are too. Because as usual, most every worst harm hits all prevailing and disenfranchised. I gotta drink water, I think, because my words are getting stuck in my mouth. Because as usual, most every worst harm hits all prevailingly disenfranchised groups the hardest. That's a good place to pause to get a little. You drink water too. Everyone drink water. Now, seeing with the utmost clarity that the universal human subject has always been a lie, how might we start reckoning with the deliberate federal funding blockade of comprehensive sex education, the global loneliness epidemic, the sex apocalypse, and the vastly uncriminalized sexual violences? All of these terrors and countless other carceral system violences are connected. I describe these phenomena and more in critical mediological work as the mechanization of humans that is flipping into the humanization of objects. Over the course of hundreds of years, these inhumanities became business as usual. Said otherwise, this colonial capitalist society treats the human body as a machine as normal. It's the reason we are equated to data, as if everything in our lives can be measured in simply numbers, and why data colonialism happens. It's the reason all the foundational discriminations are built into these systems, including algorithms as features of the ongoing inhumane environment. Going back even farther, it's the reason why the autism criteria has failed so many of us. Knock, knock, knock. Oh, what's up, Ed? How you doing? It's the reason why color-paid racisms were built into U.S. infrastructure by racist humans acting as racist media within society-building processes. It's why, for some, anti-intellectualism is valid and rational. For historically and intentionally targeted groups, anti-intellectualism is justified because Enlightenment authorities throughout history have, and in the present continue to, lie or lied as if their objective represent everyone, that when they never have been, and they never do. Instead, they lie, disinform, and miseducate the most of us into hurting ourselves and others in confusion. It's the same reason why the CDC has become reputationally bankrupt, choosing profit over all of our lives in this ongoing pandemic. It's the reason why people aren't masking anymore who used to claim that it was important to them. Because years ago, the CDC director said that it's really encouraging that 75% of people dying of COVID-19 already had 4 comorbidities. It's the reason why COVID cases have stopped being tested for, and Biden ended the emergency order, stripping countless people of their only affordable form of health insurance. It's the reason why people can't afford to fucking live anymore. We can't afford any places to live because US society prioritizes profit over care. It's why for-profit prisons, the military-industrial complex, which is the #1 environmental terrorist, food deserts, and sacrifice zones exist. It's why most millennials and Gen Z folks can't afford food, let alone rent. And why there's been a fuck ton of forever chemicals, PFAS, found in Fix panties, as well as global fucking rainwater, that obviously goes into our drinking water and anything else rainwater seeps into. It's why PFAS could be cleaned out, but it's apparently not profitable enough to do so. So global governance haven't prioritized it. It's why they use language of sustainability instead of regeneration. It's why gardens are focused on instead of food forests. All because we only know what we know. Everything has become normal and repetition, and everything is connected. Environment connection breakthroughs. In other ways, I actually did not realize that I did need this long time alone. And I finally got what I needed despite the unprecedented state of the world and everything going on in my personal and professional life that had me grieving and overworking to prepare for the awful job market. Oh, that makes sense, yeah. The knocking made sense though, because it was like, hello, I'm here. At that time, the isolation felt like something basically everyone was taking part in. So it made me feel less alone, knowing that everyone else was experiencing it in their own way. Although not everyone in the world was living entirely alone after their mom passed away from lung cancer. On August 21st, 2021, I published a piece in the online outlet In Media Res, a Media Commons project that I called "That's Misdiagnosis to You, Sir, Mediated Grieving Over the Neurodivergent Gender Gap." It was in their issue on grieving, and I used it to detail ways that the universalized Enlightenment subject has poisoned the waters of our understanding about what autism and other neurotypes really are now. And as you can see, at the time, around then, I was still mistakenly using the words neurodivergent and autistic nearly interchangeably. I had only recently learned neurodivergent was a reductive binary opposite to neurotypical, and that it means that many neurotypes beyond autism or ADHD. I also did make note of that inside said essay and linked to a source that did a pretty great job of detailing why this happened. About a month after that, I was interviewed in a piece in Good Morning America about the way that the design of mRNA vaccines was incredibly cis heterosexist, because most all medical research is based around the white cis male medical body. I was chosen primarily because, unfortunately, after my first Pfizer shot, the period I had later that month was the most painful one I'd ever had in my life, and I felt like I was going to pass out. Some medical doctors in the piece admitted that due to biases within the medical industrial complex and the authority gap, this and more has led to inequities in medical design and treatment to occur as normal, and it was a serious problem. I already knew that as a critical media ecologist. However, as often happens, the bit that Good Morning America reporter included in that article reduced my research description to totally decontextualized, almost vaccine denial looking empty opinion. The authority gap definitely won that one. Anyway, back to my experience of 2021. As a person completely alone for 2 years at that point, I spent time learning that far too many other people were living in very abusive situations, and my research documented that. And yes, any amount is far too many. My dissertation gave me an opportunity to look at what exactly was going on in a very thorough way as I was experiencing isolation. In many ways, writing my dissertation gave me space to process things that I otherwise never would have, alongside writing a fuck ton of poetry to process all my past emotional, verbal, and sexual abuses. It allowed me to realize that in many ways it was actually a huge relief not to have the social burden of going out and potentially feeling socially pressured to flirt with, date, and or even eventually have sex with cis men. And it also put into perspective for me that I don't know if I'm ever going to trust anyone I ever meet again to actually go through the process of caring enough about other people's lives to take basic fucking preventative measures to protect others' lives. I fear that that is something that is going to stick with me for the rest of my life. Seeing just how many people don't give a single fuck if other people die because they somehow think they're invincible, despite the fact this thing can disable and kill basically anyone completely at random. And after 1 million deaths in the US alone, I don't know how that wasn't made clear to folks. I don't know how people couldn't possibly care about how serious this virus remains. No matter how much they're in denial, I can't understand. I don't know if it's just because of the level of trauma that I've experienced through all my life or what. I can't see an excuse for ignoring how serious both COVID-19 and the climate crisis are to us. This was also the year I decided to impromptu publish 8 mini chapbooks of poetry of some of my favorite poems. I also started submitting my poetry to various other outlets and got other publications. I did a fuck ton of service work I never got paid for. My long ass CV shows that I worked my absolute fucking ass off. Once again, I had nothing in my life but low pay work. That one time I almost suffocated myself. On a different bodily note, during my Spendapalooza in the later part of 2020, I had bought a Peloton bike. So I was exercising more than I ever had in my adult life. But after moving into a nice apartment, I thought that I could remain isolated there without any consequences. I barely ever opened my windows. And I had air purifiers. Despite all my heavy exercising and incredibly diligent isolation in said new luxury apartment, I began noticing that I was, for some reason, having trouble breathing inside and getting a decent amount of heart palpitations that I ignored. Whether that was because I needed to always have my bedroom door closed so that Twinkle couldn't come inside my room because I needed one place in my apartment where she couldn't go since, duh, I'm allergic to her, or what, I was rather confused since I was in great shape again. Instead of caring about my health or well-being, I started writing my dissertation month by month. The prior year, I had joined TikTok that one week that Trump threatened to get rid of it in 2020, and only lurked. I began gathering my 428 TikTok videos from late 2020 through 2021, attempting to capture an algorithmic moment in time of AFAB sociosexual reality. Even while living in it, I knew that, yeah, okay, let me repeat that. Even while living in it, I knew that time was momentous. I just didn't have the language to articulate it yet. My primary artifacts for my dissertation were biomimetic sex tech ads from the brand Laura DiCarlo. But while preparing my prospectus for my dissertation, which is like the proposal, it occurred to me that I should contextualize them inside TikTok videos. Around that time of the pandemic, the TikTok user base had exploded. An app that used to be dismissed as a young person's dance app during early years of COVID was now for the first time suddenly being seen as a legitimate area of study. As someone that was in it, I experienced how much it was changing many people's lives, me included. I saw how the TikTok algorithm was able to detect seemingly impossible characteristics of people and categorize them, unlike anything that had ever existed before. But I was at a lowly R2, so I knew I didn't have access to any sophisticated software to grab the metadata of these videos. For anyone that doesn't know, an R2 PhD program is focused on a combination of teaching and research and service work, whereas an R1 is considered more prestigious because you just focus on research, and that's who gets all the funding. So that's what I'm saying. So I did it all manually myself. I went through every single saved video, 428 videos for 5 days from morning until night, searching for them based off of mainly the characteristics of the creator and their tag. I grabbed all the data that I could find and manually input them into Excel spreadsheets, a process I had never been shown how to do and completely created myself as one of the first researchers to ever do research on TikTok. There's a really high likelihood that what I did will never be replicated ever again. And I refuse to downplay the reality of my hard work. I worked hella hard to do what I accomplished. Also, thank you for the hand hearts, Miranda. In hindsight, my autistic hyperfocus enabled me to do it and write my dissertation in 5 months' time. I wrote the first 2 chapters in the first month, took the first 3 weeks off, and wrote a chapter the last week of the next 4 months. I was a lucky one in my short, underfunded program to have prepared for this since 2018. Most people in my cohort had no idea what their dissertation was going to be about until their prospectuses were written. I had 3 years on them preparing for my project, and 2 years funding my corporate blood money from my mom's lung cancer, giving me an immense privilege of not having to work while taking care of myself and entirely writing in my 4th year. I'm incredibly proud of my dissertation. Most PhDs joke that no one reads theirs, besides maybe some of their faculty committee responsible for overseeing the project and molding PhD candidates into scholars. As of right now, my dissertation has been read by almost 1,350, as in 1,350 people, just on academia.edu. And I'm proud of that. I also read it on my Clubhouse account for free. Back to air. The week after I finished defending my dissertation, I started noticing that my very expensive air purifier had gotten very loud. So I decided to finally investigate it more. That was when I noticed it had a couple fancy detectors detecting invisible shit in my air inside of it. Turns out the CO2, carbon dioxide, and VOC, volatile organic chemical levels, were fucking atrocious. For anyone that doesn't know, CO2 monitors the level of air circulation, whereas VOCs are an ambiguous list of things emitted in processes of plants and humans, heat, etc., some of which have recently been identified as carcinogens. Meaning, if when you breathe them in for prolonged periods of time, they increase your likelihood of getting many cancers. That's when I learned my apartment was full of poison and very little air. Hence my long heart issues. I also had containers upon containers of volatile chemicals inside my 2-bedroom unit, as well as many containers of ammonia-ridden wet wipes and bottles of noxious hand sanitizer, as my mom's cancer blood money could buy me. The research about VOCs being linked to cancer had only come out about a year prior, whereas CO2 levels are almost completely ignored compared to carbon monoxide, because unless you do exactly what I did, it's mostly a non-issue. In fact, that year, I learned that when you Google CO2, carbon dioxide, the vast majority of search results on Google are going to mostly give you information about CO1, carbon monoxide. As most people know, carbon monoxide is very deadly in relatively small quantities. But if you don't have enough oxygen in a space over a long period of time, that's also deadly. I was in a new apartment complex that had well-sealed walls. I was suffocating myself to death in my 2-bedroom apartment. I know because one night I began to feel lightheaded and noticed Twinkle was also not feeling good, and so I called 911. The firefighters and building manager treated me like absolute dog shit. Meanwhile, I didn't have health insurance, and I sure as fuck couldn't afford to go get my blood oxygen levels tested, despite blood money and feeling like I was imminently about to pass out from prolonged lack of oxygen. I called them, and I walked outside to my car with Twinkle experiencing confusion and delirium. They arrived and tested the space for CO1, a chemical I was not yet informed about, and an oxygen-deprived delirium didn't correct. Most homes that have gas appliances have carbon monoxide detectors for that very reason. It's a chemical where if it's in your air, it can kill you quickly without you realizing it is. But what I was experiencing was an entirely new era issue. I was living the consequences of someone who thought they could live completely isolated without opening themselves to the overall ecology. The irony of my belief as someone who does critical media ecological work is just staggering. But I am just human too, y'all. But again, I only knew what I knew then. Everything I lived became normal in repetition, and everything was connected. So I conducted more research. My mom always said that my grandma got bladder cancer from breathing in air fresheners. Guess what's in air fresheners that causes cancer? Volatile organic chemicals, VOCs. And my mom died of lung cancer because of chemicals brought home in my dad's work clothes from BP Amoco. Guess what those chemicals almost certainly were classified as? The same motherfucking VOC chemicals. If I didn't get smart and fast, there was a very high likelihood that I would have suffered the same imminent fate as my own mother and her mom before her. And one day, I still might from prolonged exposure to VOCs that are ignored. Because in colonially founded, I made this term up, but I love it, so I'm so persistent with it. Because in colonially founded, capitalist funded societies, corporations can poison us and our loved ones for profit and settle for blood money. Safe to say, I did a frantic house clean soon after. I started opening my windows for at least 5 minutes a day in the morning and night. But it was fucking winter, so it was fucking freezing. But I needed to air out the goddess damn place to protect Twinkle and I's health and well-beings. So that's what I did the entire rest of the time that I lived in that fucking air vacuum-like apartment. That other time, I almost puked to death. Despite all my new goofy fucking health habits, diligence, and over a year of intense-ass working out, one day I ate either A, Red Robin, trying their vegan option for the first time in years, or B, an Alpha brand microwave burrito that ended up contaminated and got incredibly, incredibly sick. And I mean so fucking sick that I thought I was gonna die for about 5 or 6 days completely bedridden. Only a couple months prior, I had defended my dissertation and became a doctor. But in March 2021, I woke up to the feeling I was gonna throw up everything I'd eaten in my whole fucking life. I'd gotten food poisoning maybe once or twice like this in my life, but honestly, I'd never felt sickness like this before. Not long before this, I learned that Omicron can oftentimes present like food poisoning. But I was living alone in Dyson-ass fucking luxury apartment and didn't medically advocate for myself. So instead of doing anything, I was unable to move from bed for 4 or 5 days, clearing out my system and hoping I didn't die. I couldn't eat or drink for the first few days of it. Everything exiting my body was almost entirely yellow. A part of me wondered if I was detoxing from some sort of volatile organic chemical overload in my body. But then months later, I also got an alert from Amazon that the burrito company that I ate right before it was recalled. I even had it documented on my FitnessPal app, so I had evidence that after documenting my food intake as normal for over a year, suddenly after eating their fucking burrito, I got that sickness. I tried to seek out justice from that, but I never got a call back. I'd been vegan at that point for like a decade, and regardless of if it was contaminated with some sort of bacteria or whether there was dairy in it, they very well might have fucking poisoned me if that's what happened. Truth be told, I'll probably never fucking know what actually happened to me. The first few days, I could only get a sip of water. I brought a coconut water onto my bedside table. That and a little bit of actual water were the only things I could ingest for 4 days. I spent my time mostly in a delirium watching TikTok lives of people speedrunning old school Mario and or scratching off lottery tickets. I learned just how unhinged TikTok live culture really is those days. I think that was also one of the first times I actually gave ASMR a shot. At first, I hated it. All ASMR, even the kind I later grew to enjoy, made me deeply uncomfortable as someone who wasn't allowed the privilege of being embodied and accepting any pleasure that was solely my own. This is why I wrote my forthcoming paper about ASMR intimacy in the COVID-19 era. To see a fuller picture of that, it's on academia.edu. The words are getting stuck again, so I gotta drink more water. All right. Anyway, I'd never felt so close to death before, which is true. It's true. I'm truly like, even after all the things I'd lived, that was the closest for sure. I think I actually accepted that I might die for a few days, and I was like, whatever. I finished my dissertation at least. I wouldn't doubt it if in some alternate reality I did die, but in this one, I'm existing, and I just haven't been the same since. Luckily, Twinkle was living in the other room, totally self sufficient between all the automated things that were feeding her, giving her water, and allowing her to use the litter box, play, etc. Thanks, Ed. Anyway, eventually, I could ingest more fluids. And later still, actually eat some solid foods. Not too long after that, I tried to exercise. It worked for a little bit, but then I realized I absolutely couldn't fucking do that anymore. Like I said, I was in the best shape of my life. For like over a year before that. I was lifting more than I ever had in my life, and I had a fucking Peloton. But ever since I got sick, I literally can't exercise at all. And I haven't been able to since. I don't know if I got food poisoned and it irreparably disabled me or what. I don't know if I ended up getting Omicron and was just never tested because I was completely alone and I have long COVID or what. All I know is that based off of the research I've seen, autists are high risk for long COVID and a severe case of COVID. So if it takes the rest of my life, I'm going to be masking and taking my health real seriously now. Because for the first time in my whole fucking life, I actually want to live as who I am. It doesn't sway me if the rest of the entire fucking world doesn't mask. I'm not moved by peer pressure anymore. They can keep on continuing to deny that this cardiovascular disease doesn't exist, becoming more and more disabled and dying. I had something to live for now, for the first time in my whole goddess damn life at 33, and it was finally living as who I actually fucking am. But what made matters then more complicated is I had no jobs prospects, and my lease would be up in June. During the last 8 or so months prior, I had been frantically applying for academic jobs. 2 weeks before my lease was up, I got an offer at Miami for a job I knew I was overqualified for because it was teaching classes that I had now taught since 2015, a basic public speaking course. As excited as I was incredibly stressed about frantically rushing to find movers and a place to live. The only seemingly livable place available that quickly was tiny student housing. I knew it would be shit and the outside looked like a literal prison, but it was a block from campus and my office building, so I thought, fuck it. That's it. That's the chapter. Like I said, this book is shorter. It's like half the length of the first 30 years of my life. So that means it's still pretty fucking long per chapter for each year. You've read half of it, but if you would like the other half, you're gonna have to at least buy it for 9.99 on Kindle. I don't know if so this is obviously I haven't refreshed my window. There's a chance that while I was reading this, the paperback book might have been approved because that's been in process. Like I submit them basically the same time, but there was like an issue because this one's like, it says it's 80 pages long, but it was actually like 100. So I guess maybe Kindle is like surprisingly a little bit bigger, which I was kind of expecting the opposite. But yeah, anyway, the reason why I say that is because I made like oh, nice, thank you. I made a fancy cover for the paperback. I also updated the cover of the paperback book on the first one. So I've been the bad guy. I updated the paperback on that, so now there's a fancy cover on that one too. I made it kind of because I'd never really designed a cover by myself before. I've designed everything about these books entirely by myself. So I've learned how to do that over the course of the last month. And now that's updated. But thank you for doing that. Hell yeah. Yeah, the first one is like I said, it's a lot, but I think like I said, if you haven't read that one, this one now isn't going to make as much sense. And it's funny because I didn't anticipate for them to come out this way. Like I said, that's just sort of how it ended up being. And I think it's worked out the right way. Like I always saw when I just had my poetry books on Amazon Kindle, I never expected to ever use the like series feature. And then after I wrote this first one, and then like I said before I started reading it, I was like, wait, I didn't say any of the things I said I would. Like like I didn't feature like what my research showed. I mentioned it in brief, but I really didn't like expand on it and like why like what I actually saw from my experience and from my research. And I think that's what's going to be most beneficial other than just like having a narrative that I've never seen anyone else tell about, like I said, being a late in life realized neuroqueer person during a time where if you're COVID conscious, you've never been more isolated before. And like the loneliness of that, but also like the strange solitude and peace in a world that obviously is so incredibly hateful to us in basically every way imaginable that it's like such a strange experience, and I feel like it's really important to articulate. So I hope that like, I want to hear what everyone thinks about it obviously, but I'm hoping, let me know what you think of it after you read the second one because I'm curious to see like what I'm always hoping in doing something like this is like I've read, as I described at the beginning of this book and as I mentioned in the last one, there's been books like Spectrums, Autistic Trans People in Their Own Words, and like, obviously people have seen the most Unmasking Autism. But like for real, like those books change our fucking lives. And if I could tell a story that might have any level of impact, like even a portion of that, that means everything to me. And I know that despite the fact I'm risking doing it, it's worth it if I can have that kind of impact. And since I'd never seen anyone else connect all these things, I think it's really important too. Because what do I got to lose? They're not even paying me enough to live. I'm gonna shit talk all of it because why the fuck not? Like truly, like it's worth it. So hopefully you relate, and I'm sorry if you do at the same time, just like how I said for the first one. It's such a fucking bittersweet, like the solitude of our community in particular is so fucking bittersweet. But the parts that it's sweet are really sweet. Like there's something. I mean, I would never be. I'll not like as you'll read, because really I start talking about like how like because the first 2 years for sure are like the most depressing. The second two is where I actually like there's a reason why, obviously both on the Twitch, like down here, you can see that on TikTok too. Like there's a reason why in the first cover, and I didn't plan it this way. This is actually what Night Cafe, the AI art creator, just did. The way that the sunflower has the blue inside with the black whirlpool that looks like some sort of portal, that really perfectly symbolizes exactly what I was doing in the first one because it's like I was diving back into like who I am today. And think about this. I've been using the sunflower for almost a year, and I didn't know that that was even like a nowadays like I don't know. I hate, like I said, I hate using the word neurodivergent, but it is. It's become a neurodivergent symbol that has been openly embraced that I didn't realize was going to happen, but I've been using that for a long time. And like just the color yellow in general. And then what happened at the Indiana Dunes is like the fucking water. And then me like fly, my little bird ass that's right here flying into the pit of my past to tell the story of the first 30 years. And then now the second cover, and it sucks because the second cover it doesn't do itself justice from far away. If you can look at the second cover closer up, it's gonna look way better, just so you know. Like, let me see. So let me show, okay. So it's gonna cover up me on TikTok, but even this looks better. Like, let me, oh wait, that's zoomed out. So you can see, and I'm gonna try to make it better. It looks more pixelated here than it even is because they like shrunk it down and then I made it bigger. But you see how it's like this is the one that's like a whirlpool, and then this one's like what I'm living in now. But like it's like this part's like a bird nest if you really look at it. Which is like it's like here was the first 30 years, and then also another flower has grown that represents the fourth. And there's still, there's joy, but then there's also sadness. And it's kind of just like, it's not a pit of despair anymore. It's more just like a calm pool. And then here's my goofy fucking queer Dr. Bernadette Bird Bowen ass, like where I put my pronouns on my head in all my TikToks with my name right here. So I liked how it ended up, and I didn't plan it. Like I got lucky because like I was playing around with Night Cafe some more, and this just kind of all like you can only type so much direction into an AI art creator, but it's been cool how it worked out, and I'm like pretty happy with it. So like I said, thanks for hanging out. It's available now. Like the paperback very well might be available too. And luckily, so the Kindle is 9.99. The paperback is 15 bucks, which is literally half price in comparison to before because I had no idea how expensive the fucking fancy ass color paper that I got for the first paperback book is. So for anyone that hasn't known, the first paperback book was $33 because the lowest price I could set it at on Amazon was 27, and even at $33, I make like $2 for each paperback book that you buy. Whereas with the first Kindle book, really for both, they're both 9.99 each, and then I get like $6. So it's like obviously you're getting an incredibly like better quality paper for the one that's $33, but it's more expensive for you, and I get like substantially less royalties. So keep that in mind. Yeah, it's intense. And then, but like I said, for this one, it's like 15 bucks. It's regular ass paper, like the standard, they literally call it standard color paper. Oh, and also keep in mind, so on the Kindle version, the cover that was on the first one, like I said, it was like an AI square from Night Cafe, which is like the AI art creator. And I added that to the first page that has the details, like the publishing details on it. And it didn't show up right because it was a PNG file, but I guess apparently for Kindle and this, it needs to be a JPEG. So don't buy, unless you don't give a shit about that picture, don't buy the paperback or the hardcover yet. It'll be updated in like a day or two. If you do, it's not the end of the world because you can see it anyway. Like it's gonna eventually, it's literally just the same picture as on the front cover, but it's a small square version of it that's like it in full. But that'll be updated on Kindle and paperback and everything within like a day or two. It may already be updated. They make pretty quick work of live reviews for anyone that's never seen it before. So anyway, that's updated and I fixed it and everything. Um, Actually, I guess after the paperback is published, I'm gonna have to update it again. So it won't be fixed on the paperback for like a little bit longer after, but it will be fixed on the Kindle and the hardcover. The hardcover is 30 bucks. So it's about the same price, just because they only let you choose one type of color paper. So I couldn't like save anyone money there. Sorry. But it still looks nice. And like I said, they both got fancy covers where there's like a front and a back and a spine that I designed myself. So anyway, hopefully you liked it. It's very like, keeping it real as always. It's definitely not the happiest story, But I think that there is an importance in not just always pretending that everyone needs to be happy all the time, especially in ongoing unprecedented events in which, we don't really hear stories like this, unfortunately, because a lot of people are too dead set on pretending none of it's happening. So hopefully my actually being honest about all of this can help you in whatever way that it may. Um, yeah, like I said, I'm curious to hear your thoughts about it. It's a brand new, it's freshly born into the world. So enjoy it while it's got its baby skin or whatever. that's that's the language I'm using. I feel like there was something else I was gonna say, but maybe not. I think I always read the little thing once more after I finish something. So let me shrink this down a little. Or you know what? Let's just make it huge. We'll just keep it like this. No, I'm gonna shrink it. It's too big. I'm gonna read the little description that I wrote about this one more time, and then we're gonna get out of here. All right, so it goes like this. Have you ever been around people yet still felt alone? Dr. Bird has too. Within the first variant of their environmental series, they revealed 30 years. Take my money. That was perfect. I didn't know that there was a little I forget what this dog is called, but that is an incredibly cute dog. Its little dance is it is doing something very special for me. They revealed 30 years of their late in life realized secrets. In the second volume, they literally and figuratively zoom in on the last four unprecedented ones. This includes them cutting the shit about how halfway through their PhD, COVID-19 hit, and how a couple years later they added doctor to the front of their nickname. In typical bad guy fashion, Plague Dr. Bird has more puns, cuss words, and trauma than all the answers on how to create our liberatory regenerative future. But for now, they further diagnose how foundational US issues severely sicken, disable, and kill us in the algorithmic environment. And remind readers to drink water, do something nice for ourselves, and that we abso-fucking-lutely deserve better than this shit. So like I said, thanks again. I covered all the bases there that I usually say at the end of stream. So we'll call that taken care of. What's up, Hagtress? Wait, so I just finished reading the introduction and chapters 0 and 1, which were about 2020 and 2021. But if you want to check that out, I'll export this. Hopefully I'll remember to export it like right after I end the stream for once. And then it'll be available on my YouTube, Dr. Bird on Twitch playlist on YouTube. My YouTube Dr. Bird playlist on YouTube. All right, y'all. All right. Thanks again. I'll see you on the internets. Have a good night. Do something nice for yourself. Like I said, drink all the water, etc., etc., etc.